Joseph Kyle John lived on the second floor of Grenfell Tower. A little after midnight, Joseph was dozing off in his bed about to fall asleep. It was a very warm London night. Suddenly, he heard screams and shouts through the opened window in his bedroom. This was quite unusual, since the weekend was coming to an end, and most of the residents of the neighborhood would soon be starting their early shifts on Monday morning. Intrigued, Joseph got up from his bed and walked to the window. He immediately saw that the firefighters were rushing into the building. Joseph hurried to his front door and intercepted the firemen on the stairwell, where he stopped them to get some answers. He was rightfully concerned because he lived with a disabled partner and his infant son. The firefighters told Joseph that there was a fire in the building, but they assured him that the situation was under control and there was no reason to be worried. Then, the firefighters asked Joseph to return to his flat, and he complied. Little did they know that this was the beginning of the Grenfell Tower Fire, and that the events they were going to witness would deeply shock the entire country.
It's gone all the way.
The worst house fire in the United Kingdom since World War II had just started, 2 floors above Joseph's flat. Later that night, Joseph was forced to evacuate through the window of his flat. The firefighters on scene responded to a call about a faulty refrigerator that had caught fire in one of the 4th floor flats.
Fire brigade.
Yeah, hello, hi, in the fire, flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
Sorry, a fire where?
Flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
And what's the postcode?
W111TG?
W111T for
1TG.
Tango.
Yeah, but can you quick, please?
Yeah, would you just, I have to get the address. Okay, Glen.
Flat 16 Grenfell Tower, W111TG.
The fire brigade are on their way. Are you outside?
Yeah, I'm outside.
Yeah, well, the fire engines are on their way. Just tell me.
From the firefighters' perspective, it appeared to be a fairly routine incident, categorized as a 2-pump fire, indicating that 2 fire engines should be sufficient to extinguish the fire. The firefighters were confident they had the situation under control. However, it didn't take long for worried voices to sound loudly over their radios, saying, "It's a 4-pump fire." This indicated that about 4 fire engines would be necessary. Then the message escalated to, "It's a 10-pump fire," indicating an increasingly critical situation. Finally, the urgency peaked with the message, "It's the 20-pump fire," a clear indication of a catastrophic situation. The firefighters on the 4th floor were perplexed by this information. They could not comprehend it, because from their perspective, they had the situation completely under control. Then they saw the opened kitchen window and soon realized the terrifying truth. The fire had escaped from the flat and was now spreading on the outside of Grenfell Tower, and it was spreading extremely fast. The building had recently undergone some renovations, including the installation of the new aluminum composite material cladding on the exterior facade. It is important to note that Grenfell residents were not happy about this at all. They had raised multiple concerns, particularly about fire safety, with their local council. Unfortunately, their voices were ignored by the council. The maintenance of the building was also reportedly very poor. The lack of water sprinklers caused residents a significant concern, but the council's position was that they had already spent a significant amount of money renovating the building, which housed low-income families. And so, the conflict between the residents and the council continued. In the meantime, the ACM cladding that had been installed on the tower's exterior by the contractors hired by the council, although cost-effective and visually pleasing, had failed to meet several safety regulations. The most crucial of these regulations was that external walls must sufficiently resist the spread of fire. This was just one of the many shortcomings that collectively contributed to the magnitude of the tragedy that occurred that night. Sometime after the fire, the BBC conducted an experiment in an independent laboratory, the results of which were shocking. ACM cladding consists of 2 thin aluminum sheets sandwiching a polyethylene core. While aluminum itself is not directly flammable, the PE core is. In the experiment, the aluminum shield buckled when exposed to a temperature of about 200 degrees Celsius, allowing the flame to reach the highly flammable PE core. Notably, 1 kilogram of PE gives off the same amount of energy when burned as 1 to 1.5 liters of burning gasoline. A 1 by 1 meter piece of PE cladding on the exterior of Grenfell Tower contained about 3 kilograms of PE. When it ignited, it quickly facilitated the chimney effect, which further fanned the flames. It is therefore not surprising that when the fire escaped from the flat on the 4th floor through the kitchen window, it took about 15 minutes to reach the top 24th floor and consume the entire building like a colossal matchstick. Firefighters who were at the scene would later compare it to a war zone. It was very chaotic, and all sorts of things went wrong. For example, the cladding proved to be highly flammable despite the regulations, but they soon discovered that it was also waterproof. This made it impossible to extinguish it with water to prevent the flames from spreading. It was not long before large pieces of burning cladding started falling off the front of the building. The melting polyethylene dripped down like a burning rain on the men gathered below. It posed a significant danger, so the firefighters were forced to use police riot shields that they held over their heads as they went in and out of the tower. Inside the tower, fire safety regulations required the stairwell to remain smoke-free, but this was not the case. The stairwell itself was very narrow, which meant that in the later stages of the operation, both firefighters and survivors had to make their way through the many bodies lying there. An anonymous report by a fighter fire involved in the rescue operation stated, the stairwells were smoke-logged and full of casualties. The presence of smoke in the common stairwell proved to be a critical failure with catastrophic consequences. Initially, the cause of the stairwell not being smoke-free was unclear. However, experts later determined that the failure of the smoke control system was responsible. If the system had worked as designed, it should have removed smoke from the lobbies and stairwell, potentially saving lives. Unfortunately, as investigators would later determine, the system had failed because it was not isolated from the environmental ventilation system, which in turn was designed to shut down in the case of a fire in the building. The firefighters were equipped with long breathing devices, which resembled scuba gear. These sets were designed to prevent the inhalation of harmful gases and facilitate working in a smoke-filled environment. However, they have their limitations. The oxygen supply is not unlimited, and ideally the device should be used in a smoke-filled flat or room. In the Grenfell Tower, because of the thick smoke that filled the stairwell, the firefighters were forced to use their long breathing sets as soon as they entered the building. This meant that the men simply did not have enough air at their disposal to fully perform their duties. They couldn't check every flat for survivors without risking choking themselves. This doesn't mean they didn't try. One of the anonymous reports recalls how a firefighter from the North Ken brought a casualty down from the 20th floor, and the guy was unconscious by the 19th. He dragged him down to the 10th, then ran out of air. He threw his mask off and pegged it down. He collapsed as he came out. It was obvious to everyone on scene that they required so-called extended duration long breathing sets, which could allow the men to stay inside the tower for longer. Soon, all available sets in London were called upon. Meanwhile, the temperature inside the tower reached such levels that a number of firefighters suffered burns, despite wearing protective equipment. They would later describe the temperature as helmet-meltingly hot. It was reportedly as high as 500 degrees Celsius on the upper floors at floor level, and about 1600 degrees Celsius at ceiling level. Later, allegations arose regarding the alleged failure of the water pressure. This complication made operations on the flooded floors very difficult. When firefighters arrived on the floor, they first inspected the lobby. Then, they quickly opened the doors of each flat, briefly checked inside, and then promptly closed them because of the excessive temperature. Because the water pressure was reportedly not up to the firefighting, there was little else they could do. Thames Water, which was responsible for maintaining proper water pressure, later issued a statement claiming that these allegations were categorically false. Another major problem for the firefighters was malfunctioning radio communications. They struggled to understand the transmissions because the signal did not get through the thick concrete of the multi-story building. In addition, the airwaves were overwhelmed with traffic as more firefighting teams joined the operation. This made coordinating efforts extremely difficult, resulting in some firefighters turning off their radios and essentially fighting the fire blind. However, the biggest controversy of all turned out to be the stay put policy and the orders given to the tower residents to stay in their flats. When Joseph opened his front door and spoke to the firefighters, after assuring him that they had everything under control, they asked him to return to his flat and stay there because the policy dictates it. The rationale behind this approach is that the fireproof doors of each flat protect the residents and ensure that the stairwells remain clear so that the fire department can work quickly and efficiently. This policy is effective only if other regulations are strictly followed. Unfortunately, in this case, it proved to be the death sentence for many residents. It's still not clear why the order to evacuate the tower was not given immediately. Shortly after the fire had started, two families, Helen Gebremeskel with her daughter Lulia, and the El Wahhabi family of 5 tried to escape from the 21st floor. They entered the smoke-filled stairwell and rushed downstairs. On their way, as they encountered firefighters and other residents of the tower, they were repeatedly told to turn around and go back up. Helen later recalled the following: "They told us, go back up to your flat. Go back up to your flat." Eventually, both families decided to follow instructions and go back upstairs, retreating to their flats. At that point, the smoke was so thick that they barely made it out. Helen and her daughter did not want to wait alone in their flat and knocked on the door of their neighbors and friends, the Gomez family. The El Wahhabis, on the other hand, retreated to their own flat and again called 911 for help. They were advised to stay in their flat and not to come out. They were assured that someone will come and take them down when it is safe. Unfortunately, no one ever did. In reality, during the rescue operation, no firefighter managed to reach any floor higher than the 20th. The intensity of the smoke and temperature on those higher floors simply proved too much. Eventually, the El Wahhabi family had all perished in their flat. Meanwhile, Helen and Lulia, who had taken refuge in the Gomez family's flat, were becoming increasingly panicked. At around 3:30, they all witnessed a sudden fire. One of the bedrooms caught fire out of nowhere. One moment, everything seemed normal, and the next moment the room was engulfed in flames. As the flat quickly filled with choking black smoke, they turned on the shower and filled the bathtub with water, hoping that the water particles in the air would ease their breathing. However, it became clear to everyone that they had to evacuate or risk perishing from the flames or from smoke inhalation. They did everything they could to protect themselves. They wrapped wet towels around their heads and covered their bodies with wet sheets and left the flat. They walked in column, held onto the handrail, and started their descent down the narrow staircase. Helen, Lulia, and the 5 members of the Gomez family. Almost immediately they began to gag. The thick black smoke literally choked them. Helen's daughter Lulia would later recount how she tripped over countless bodies in the stairwell. It was so dark that it was almost impossible to see where to stand. At one point, she stumbled over an elderly man lying on the stairs. To her shock, he was still alive, groaning in distress but unable to get up. Heartbreakingly, there was nothing she could do to help him, so she had to continue down. Eventually, the two families became separated as some members passed out during the descent. Marcio Gomez vividly remembers the chilling moment when, at one point on the way down, his daughter told him she could go no further, only to fall silent. In the surrounding darkness, Marcio could not even see where his daughter had collapsed. It is hard to imagine how many emotions were coursing through his mind as he stood in the smoke-filled stairwell, somewhere between the 10th and 11th floors of the burning tower. Fortunately, he ran into some firefighters who promised to help his daughter. However, they urged Marcio to continue with his evacuation. When Marcio finally left the building, the first thing he saw was the ground outside the tower, which was like lava because of the accumulated molten cladding. The last survivors from the 21st floor came out of the tower around 4 a.m. By that time, the fire was raging uncontrollably and conditions inside were horrific. Their escape can only be described as a miracle. Still, the very last survivor was rescued only shortly before 8 a.m. He was a blind pensioner who had endured the raging inferno by himself for 7 hours. Amid the chaos at the scene, some separated family members from the 21st floor were reunited only hours after their escape. Unfortunately, not everyone was so fortunate. Although the order to evacuate the tower was finally given around 2:35 a.m., it had become clear much earlier that the stay put policy had to be rescinded. The consequences of this inexplicable delay resulted in avoidable loss of life. Eyewitnesses recall the harrowing sight of desperate people jumping from the burning tower. Others were seen at the windows, waving cloths or flashlights to attract attention because it had become too late for them to evacuate safely through the stairwell. Around that time, social media was flooded with short videos recorded by residents on the upper floors of the burning tower. Tragically for many, these would be the last updates posted from their accounts. At one point, a young woman appeared in a window on the 9th floor. She gestured desperately to the crowd below, signaling that she was trapped. Cradled in her arms was a small baby. It became painfully evident that she was pleading with those below to try and save her child. In a heart-wrenching moment, the desperate young woman released her baby from the window. Miraculously, a bystander rushed forward and caught the baby. It's important to note that the investigation conducted by the BBC ruled this account given by the eyewitness improbable, but not impossible. Amidst the harrowing screams for help, there was the sound of frantic banging as many trapped residents pounded on the windows, seeking attention as the fire closed in. One bystander recounted witnessing 5 people squeezing their heads through a window, desperate for fresh air. As time passed, the fire was gradually brought under control and on June 16th was officially declared extinguished. Firefighters involved in the operation were not allowed to speak to the media at the time. However, the BBC did manage to obtain some anonymous testimony. A total of 72 people lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower Fire, many of them in their flats as they obediently followed the instructions of the authorities. This misplaced trust, combined with the prevailing belief that many could have been saved if an evacuation order had been given earlier, led to great outrage within the local community. In the aftermath of the fire, outraged families and community members demanded answers. How could such a horrific tragedy take place in one of the world's wealthiest boroughs? To many, the Grenfell Tower disaster seemed like a tragedy waiting to happen, especially in light of previous complaints made to the council. Initially, the authorities were slow to respond. Many survivors felt neglected and abandoned by the local council, which was responsible for managing Grenfell Tower. As the local community and London residents rallied to offer support and comfort, more and more voices of anger and disappointment sounded. Residents believed that cost savings had taken priority over the safety of their loved ones and placed the blame entirely on the council. In response to the escalating anger, senior politicians were dispatched by the authorities. They quickly assured survivors that efforts would be made to find them new housing and that justice would be sought for the deceased. Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, launched a public inquiry into the disaster. Even members of the royal family visited the scene. Unfortunately, many survivors of the Grenfell Tower Fire would have to fight a humiliating battle with the municipality over the next few years, because the help they received was not even close to what they were promised. In response to the accident, London had experienced some civil unrest, with protests demanding justice breaking out in the city. At one point, the protesters demanding justice stormed Kensington City Hall. However, as time went on, the intensity of the protests subsided, and the community began to move forward. As of August 2023, no one had been held accountable for the Grenfell Tower Fire, though the fight for justice continues. According to a March 2023 government investigation, there are an estimated 6,000 to 9,000 towers in the United Kingdom, ranging from 11 to 18 meters high, that are deemed unsafe due to the presence of ACM cladding. New regulations have subsequently been introduced, specifically requiring the installation of sprinkler systems in these towers. In addition, plans have been drawn up to replace the flammable cladding with safer materials. As of August 2023, this work is still in progress. As of August 2023, work is ongoing on a monument dedicated to the memory of the Grenfell Tower disaster. The design and location of the memorial have been subjects of consideration, with ideas such as a memorial garden being proposed to honor the 72 people who tragically lost their lives in the fire. The Grenfell Tower disaster, which occurred in June 2017, left a profound impact, and efforts are being made to create a meaningful tribute to the victims and their families. The construction of the monument reflects the community's commitment to preserving the memory of this tragic event.